Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show my law partner, Sean Fagan. Law. We were talking about law as the subject of this show. And law is an exercise of power by a government over people, places, and things. Our founders did not trust the government. They didn't want a centralized government where power was concentrated in very few people. And yet today, that's seemingly exactly what we have.
I would say that the biggest problem is Congress. If I were to blame anybody in particular, I'd say Congress.
Agreed.
Congress doesn't, there are few leaders, because leadership requires taking a position. And if you take a position that's controversial, you worry about whether you're going to have your job when you go up for election.
It's a 51% decision.
Exactly.
Level.
And so what happens is, what I believe we're starting to see is fewer and fewer congressmen or senators taking a position because they don't want to be adverse to their constituency. They don't take a position, then the president
So they delegate it.
Yeah, by default. By not taking action, they cede it over to the executive branch or to the judicial branch because they're not taking an active enough role to head off things at the pass.
And when it's all said and done, what's happened is because of what you've described, the deference to the executive or the judiciary, we now have a federal government where a ton of power all the power, frankly, is concentrated primarily in the president or the judiciary. And on certain issues, when it's all said and done, it's just the judiciary because Congress won't do what it's doing. And even in Congress, in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, you have a few people, maybe 5, maximum 10, that are the, quote, leaders of the House or leaders of the Senate, and they run the show. So we went from supposedly to have a representative government very close to the people, very accountable to the people, to now we have what I just described, centralized power and very few people. So how do we solve this problem?
I mean, I think that's what we're seeing in today's political climate. Whether you look at Bernie Sanders or you look at Donald Trump, they're
outsiders.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I think intuitively everybody recognizes whether or not you benefit from some of these laws or don't benefit, that at the end of the day it's going to spiral out of control if somebody doesn't step up and be a leader. And what we're seeing right now is people that are career politicians are not turning out to be very good leaders.
Well, they're not trusted.
Yeah.
They're not trusted at all. What's also, though, disturbing is that we have such, I mean, it almost couldn't be any greater polar opposites of positions of the hottest, so to speak, candidates. Certainly, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, you've got an extremely, a philosophy of a lot of controlled, centralized government. More of this, not less of what we have, more of what we have. And then with Mr. Trump being the presumptive nominee, you got a guy, frankly, I'm not quite sure what he believes or what drives him. He says he's, less government and more power to the people. We'll see, depending on how the election goes. Let's talk about the fact that the judiciary, when it's all said and done, both at the federal level and at the state level, seems to have, ultimately, when it's said, all the power.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to the differences. The judiciary at the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, they're appointed for life. And there are benefits to that because that means they're less likely to be swayed by public opinion in a given moment. But the downside is,
well, let's point out, when we say appointed by life, what we're really saying is they don't have to be elected.
That's right.
They never have to run for a vote.
That's correct.
Of the people. They're not accountable.
And when the theory is that if you have people that don't have to worry about elections, that they're going to be the most honest when it comes to interpreting the laws that are in front of them and determine whether or not they're constitutional. In Louisiana, we have the Supreme Court justices are elected.
Right.
And so you could argue both ways on this, but what we're starting to see now, at least from my perspective as a lawyer, is the United States Supreme Court, because they're nominated by Congress, well, actually they're nominated by the President, approved by Congress, by the Senate, that it becomes so partisan that you can almost predict
how they're going to vote,
right. Because it has less to do with the law, but more with political bent. And of course, that's terrifying.
Well, and we've discussed that Congress has abdicated its role and responsibility to write the laws and control the purse strings of this wonderful country. And instead, we're seeing via rules and regulations and executive orders of the president is seemingly, it hasn't been ruled on yet by the ultimate appeal court, but it has been ruled unconstitutional by a district and appellate court, at least on one instance. And then in the judiciary, you're seeing the same thing, where they're under the guise of seeing a particular constitutional right or interpreting laws with a certain type of definition of words. They are turning on the head, perhaps, some of the intent of legislation. And so they're, in essence, legislating, again, doing the job of Congress. How do we fix that?
It comes back to, once again, holding the representatives that we elect accountable. The federal courts, not only the Supreme Court, but also the federal district courts and the federal courts of appeal, they're all appointed, and they're lifetime appointments. And so the key is who is appointing the people. And you know, we can argue among ourselves till we're blue in the face, but you've got to step back and say, we've got to take control, and the people that we elect need to reflect what we expect.
That's right.
When it comes to, and that's what's going to change who gets appointed.
Well, and you know, it's so interesting. The Constitution has been amended. There have been proposed amendments for decades, over decades now, for a balanced budget, for elections to be held every 10 years or whatever for the Supreme Court justices. There's also a new mechanism that's being discussed. It's in the Constitution, and that is a convention of the states, whereby the states agree to meet and, in essence, write an amendment that then has to be approved of the Constitution. It's a way of the states and the people taking back. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, wow. I mean, it would be great if we could get enough unanimity across the 50 states to have the leaders get together. But again, it comes back to who is gathering, who is going to represent the people at a convention. And so it comes back down to us, the normal Joes, and whether or not we sit back at our dining room table or our living room sofa and complain about who's in office, or whether we step up and say, no, we're gonna implement a change from the grassroots. And that's what it comes down to, because the convention is one means of doing it, but think about logistically what it takes and who would be representing you.
Well, and what's so interesting is Louisiana, I believe there's now maybe 9 state legislatures that have said we want a state convention, and the governors have signed it. Louisiana joined that list as of, I think, 2 weeks ago. And so this is moving forward, but it's interesting, it's a divide in the country. You can look at it, so far it's all southern states seemingly, and you don't have the northern states, but we'll see how this turns out. Sean, thank you so much for discussing the issue with us. Folks, thank you for joining us on The Legal Lines with my law partner, Sean Fagan. See you next time.